Hey everyone. In today's video, I want to give you a quick introduction to FastAPI. So FastAPI is a Python framework that you can use to build APIs, obviously. So the nice thing about FastAPI is that it supports asynchronous functionality, and the framework itself is asynchronous. So in a sense, it's more high performance than a typical web framework like Flask or Django, even though there are ways you can make those asynchronous. But FastAPI is built to be asynchronous. Also, the nice thing about it is you don't have to write as much code because by using the Python type hint system, FastAPI is able to figure out a lot of things that you want to do, so you don't have to write the code directly. Another thing, because of those type hints, that it can do easy conversion to and from different forms of data. So with an API, you'll have like data coming through the requests. So it can convert that into data models that you have in your code. And then when you want to return something to the user, it can convert those data models back into something that the user can actually see. And then along with that, there's also validation. So because you have these type hints and because you can have some data models and use those data models as type hints, FastAPI is able to give you some validation just based off the type hints. And I'll show you how all that stuff works in the video. So this is the API that we're going to build. I have Swagger open, and basically it just allows me to add some cities that have time zones. So if I add a city like Los Angeles, and then I have like America/Los Angeles, I can add that as a time zone, and it just creates that for me, and it returns the thing that I just added. And then I can add another one. So for this one, we'll say Washington, DC, and this will be America/New York. And I can add this. And then if I go to the cities here and try it out, I can get the cities that I have in my database. It's just like a list in my app. And it also tells me the time in those locations and, their actual time zone, how many hours offset from UTC. And then also I can delete here and specify an ID for a city. So I want to delete the first city, which is Los Angeles, hit execute. Nothing appears because it's a delete. And then I can go back here and query for all the cities again. And we see Washington, D.C. is the only city left. So that's what I'll be covering in this video. And let's get into writing the code. Okay, so to get started, first we need to install the framework. So pip install FastAPI. And I already have a virtual environment open. So just waiting for that. And then we need a server to run our API. So you can use either UVcorn or Hypercorn. I can't get UVcorn to install on my machine, so I'll be using Hypercorn, but they do the same thing. So you can pick one. If you want to follow this video, just choose Hypercorn like I am. So pip install Hypercorn, and I'll just wait for that. And then getting started is pretty easy. So I'll create a file called main.py, and in it, I'll import from FastAPI. So from FastAPI, import FastAPI. And then I need to instantiate an app object using the FastAPI class. So this is similar to Flask if you've used Flask before. So app equals FastAPI, just like that. And then once I have that, I can start writing endpoints so I can have an API. So the easiest one would be a GET request. So what I can do is I can take the app object and use a decorator. So the @ and then app dot, and then you can use an HTTP method. So get, post, put, delete, patch, options, and so on. There are a few, but you would only use maybe 4 or so in a real app. So for this one, I'll have a GET request and I'll put it on the index. So this is very similar to Flask, except instead of app.route, it's app.get. So this part is actually similar to Botto if you've used that. So at this point, I need to create a function underneath the decorator. So I'll just call this index. And then from here, I can return some data. So what I can do is I can just return something like a key and then value, right? So now to start up this app, what I have to do is I have to use Hypercorn. So Hypercorn, and then I need to specify the name of the file. So main, and then the name of the app object inside of the file, which is app, so a colon between the two. And then I'm going to use -- reload, so the server will automatically restart every time I save the file. So I'll start this, And then I'll go over and open up the URL in my browser. So let me go to the browser and I'm going to the index, and now I can see key value. So it's really that simple to get a result. But of course, you can do that in Flask or Bottle, and that's not really interesting. So what we're going to get into next are the features that make FastAPI unique. So first is the automatic documentation. So you actually get two forms of documentation. You have Swagger. So you just go to your URL and then /docs, and you get Swagger here. So I have one endpoint and it's called index, and I can open it up and I can see information about how it works. So if I click try it out and hit execute, then here I get the response, which is just key value. And there's also a different type of documentation called redoc, and it's just a different way of displaying, what each endpoint is and what it can do, right? So we'll come back to Swagger for this video, and I'll show you more how it works, but just know that you have automatic documentation generated for you when you create your endpoints in your app. So I'm going to create a sample API to kind of demonstrate how FastAPI works and what's cool about it. So first, I'm going to create like an in-memory database just to hold the things that I want to display from the API and things that I want to allow the user to insert. So DB just equals an empty list. And then what I'm going to do is I'll create a few endpoints. So for this, I'll have 4 endpoints. 2 of them will be GET requests. So I'll have app.get and then /cities. And then I'll have one for getting a particular city. So cities, and then / and then some variable to hold the ID of a city. So I'll just call this city ID, and it's just curly brackets around the actual name of the variable that I'm going to use. And then I'll have one for post requests, which will allow me to create a city. So cities with no trailing /. And the final one will be delete, which will allow me to delete any cities that I've added into the database. So now I want to create the function that goes under the first one, get. So I'll call this get cities. And what I can do here is very simple. I can just return the information from the database. So the easiest way to do that would just be to return DB. So one of the things that FastAPI will do for you is it will create a JSON version of any data that you pass as long as it's well defined. So for something like a list or strings, it's pretty easy to convert. And as we'll see later, it can also convert different data structures that you create as well. Let me comment these out because they're going to cause the program to crash because they don't have functions underneath them. But here we see if I go to this endpoint, which I won't do, it's just going to return an empty JSON object. That's not very interesting. So what I want to do next is I want to allow the user to actually create a new city. So before I can create a new city, I have to kind of define a structure for a city in my app. So to do this, I can create a model for it. And I'll use Pydantic, which will allow me to create a model, and it uses the type hints that I talked about earlier to define the type of fields that are in it. So I'll say from Pydantic, import base model. And then up here, just below the database, I'll create a model. So I'll call this city for the model, and it's going to inherit base model. And then I want to specify the fields that are in city. So name and time zone are going to be the 2 that are there. And what I want to do is I want to specify the type of them. So this is where the type annotation comes into play in Python. So instead of doing something like name equals, field.string, this would be like marshmallow if you've ever used that before. Instead of doing all that, all you have to do is say stir. And then for time zone, I can say stir. So if I had like a list, I can say list. If I had a dictionary, I can say dictionary. If I had a datetime object, I can say datetime, or so on. Whatever the data type is, you just put it here after the colon. So I have 2 fields in my city, and they have the type of string, right? So now when I go to create a city, so let me go over to post. So I actually need to uncomment this one, and I'll create a function underneath, and I'll call this create city. So create city. And here is the part that is a lot different than probably any framework that you've used in Python. So here I'm going to use type annotations again. So I'm going to have a parameter called city, but in addition to the parameter, I'll have a type for the parameter, and it's going to be that city model that I just created up here. So by doing this, FastAPI will automatically expect something that resembles a city to be in the body of the request. So when I go to Swagger and create it, you'll see how I can create a city in the body of the request, send it, and then FastAPI will pick that up. It will put it in this variable called city, and I'll have it available as that city argument. So what I can do here is because it is a city object, what I want to do is I want to put it in my DB. And there are a couple ways of doing it. I can put the object itself directly into the database, but instead what I'll do is I'll convert it to a dictionary first and then put it in my database. So to do that, I just can do DB append, right? And I'm going to put the city in there, but I'm going to convert it to a dictionary. So I don't necessarily need to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway just to have a common structure, because if you want to see this database with some things, it'd be a lot easier to have like dictionaries in here first instead of creating cities. But if you want to create cities directly, you can. Don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. And then what I want to do is I want to return the thing that I just inserted into the database. So I can return the last item in the database by using -1, right? So what's going to happen is the city is going to be in the body, and I need to add a colon here. And then I'm going to convert it to a dictionary and append it to my in-memory database, and then I'm going to return it, right? So now let's take a look at this in Swagger. So I'll go over to the browser and I'll go back to docs, and we see a post request that's green. I can click it, and here there's an example request body, so name and time zone, and it says they both need to be strings. And if I click try it out, it's going to give me those two things as placeholders, and then I can create a city. So for instance, I can say Las Vegas, and then I can have like America/Los Angeles for the time zone. I can execute this, and it looks like everything was successful. I get a 200 response, and we see down here, I get the same thing in return. So it just mirrors what I inserted into the database. So now if I go back to my get route where I'm just returning everything in the database and hit try it out, we see I have a single thing in my response, Las Vegas, America/Los Angeles. So if I add another city, let's say Miami, and I'll use America/New York and execute, everything was successful. If I go back up to execute for the GET requests, now we see two things are in the response. So I have both Las Vegas and Miami, and they're both in my in-memory database. So that feature of allowing type annotations to kind of tell FastAPI what to expect and how to handle it is what makes things so much easier. Because in a different framework, what you have to do is you have to kind of take the model and then take the input data and use the model to interpret the input data and then create like some object in return, right? So you have to do a few steps. You would have to create like a method in your class to convert it if you didn't have any automatic way of doing that in something like, Django REST framework. But really the idea is just by using type hints, FastAPI can figure out a lot of things that need to be done for you without you having to specify them more explicitly. So now let's work on the delete one, because the delete is pretty simple. So I'm going to create another function, and I'll call this delete city. And for this one, I want to have a city ID. So up here, I'm going to do / and then city ID. So in this particular case, the city ID is going to represent the location in the list. So the first ID, so ID 1, will be the thing at the 0 index. ID 2 will be at the first index, and so on. So for this one, because I'm expecting a city ID, I put city ID here as a parameter, and then I need to specify a type, and the city ID is just going to be an integer. And then what I can do is I can delete it. So by deleting, I simply mean popping out of my in-memory database. So I can do db.pop and then city ID -1, right? Because if it's ID 1, I want 0, so I just have to subtract 1. And then I just want to return nothing. So I'll just return an empty dictionary. Okay, so let's try this again. So because my app restarted, I have to add things into the database again. So I'll just execute that for Miami. And now add Las Vegas in here again. So America, Los Angeles is the time zone, right? So now I should have two things in my in-memory database. And I do so Miami and Las Vegas. Now, if I go down to this, and let me just refresh the entire page. So I can see the delete city here. So it's in red. And this doesn't mean it's an error, it just means it's delete. So I can hit try it out, and it's expecting an integer. So if I say city ID 1, I'm expecting that Miami will be deleted because I just added Miami first. So execute, I get nothing in return. So now if I go back to cities and try it out and execute, now I only have Las Vegas in here instead of having Miami in there too. And just to show you what happens if you try to insert something invalid in the URL. So if I go to cities, well, actually, I can't show you this in the browser yet because it needs to be for the GET request. So I'll show you that momentarily. What I want to show you is putting invalid data in the city ID, but for this one, Swagger won't even let me execute it because it has validation itself. So on the endpoint for cities here, I'll show you what happens when you do something invalid. So I have app.get and then city. So I want to get a particular city in the database. So this is pretty simple. I'll create the function and I'll call it get city. And then we have the city ID. And once again, it's going to be an integer. And to do this, I just simply need to return db and then city -1. So it's similar to popping. We just look for the item at the particular index once you subtract 1 from the ID. So now we can go back to the app. And once again, I have to add the cities in. So I will, let's see, try it out. And then I'll add Las Vegas and then America / Los Angeles for the time zone. Execute that. And then I'll add Miami. And then America / New York is the time zone. And I'll add that. Now, if I go to get cities, I still get the 2. But if I want to get a particular city, so let me refresh so I can see the one that I just added. So here, this get cities / city ID. And if I want to try it out and get the first city, I get Las Vegas. If I want to get the second city, I get Miami. So now to show you what happens when you add something invalid. So first, this is valid. So number 1, so that's an integer. But if I try to add something that's not an integer, like some random string and hit enter, I get this error message that's generated for me automatically. So this is another nice thing. You have these error messages that are generated for you because FastAPI knows what to expect. And if it gets something that it's not expecting, then it knows the kind of error message to generate. So it's just telling me that the city ID is not a valid integer. So that's a pretty good error message. So if I change it back to 1, then I get the value that I want. So for the last thing in this introduction video, what I want to do is I just want to complete the API that I showed you at the beginning of the video, where it handles the actual time using the API that I have here, this world time API. So what I'll do is I'll install requests, and then with requests, I'll query the API. So pip install requests, and then I'll just import it down here. I'll need it. And what I'll do is I'll go over to, let's see, I want to put the information in the cities here. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the time zone that is stored in my in-memory database for the particular city, and I'm going to get the time for it. So to do that, in cities, I'll create a results list first. And what I'll do is I'll loop over each city in my database. So for city in DB, and then I'll perform a request. So R equals requests.get. This is going to be an F string, and then I just need to get the actual endpoint. So I'll just go down here, and it will tell me the current time zone. So I can just take, let's see, which one is it? This one. So just take this URL, put it in here, and then the value that's going to be dynamic is going to be the actual time zone. So I can say city, and then I want the time zone for the city. So remember city is going to be an item in my database, which is a dictionary. So that's why I can access it in this way. So all my cities will eventually be stored in my in-memory database as dictionaries. So I can access time zone like this, and then I can get the result. So the current time is going to be, I think, as RJSON. So I'm converting the request result to JSON, and then I can just get date time, right? And then I can append that to the results. So I'll say results dot append. And what I want to do is I'll just create a dictionary. So the name will be city dot or a city name. And then the time zone will be the city time zone. And finally, the current time. So this should be a string. Current time will be the current time, right? And I just noticed this should have double quotes. So let's see. Yeah, it just told me that. So let's restart the server and let's try that again. So let's just refresh this here and then perform a get request on cities, execute, and I get nothing here. So let's see. Oh, that's because I need to add data into the database. So I'll go over to posts and I'll add one. So we'll have Las Vegas, and then we'll have America / Los Angeles. Execute that. And then I'll go back to get cities, execute it. I get an error. Probably has something to do with the API. So what I'll do is I'll print out the results from the API. So we'll do print r.json just so I can see everything that I get. And I'll restart the server. And I'll go back and I'll add Las Vegas back in there. So try it out. We have Las Vegas. Time zone is America / Los Angeles. Execute. Cities, get city. Try it out. Execute. I get an error. And the results is, it looks like the same. It looks like it didn't return correctly. But let me go ahead and see what it looks like when I do this. So I'll just copy the link here and I'll put America / Los Angeles. And it says unknown location. So maybe that's it. Let me see if I have the locations correct. So here's just a list of all the valid values. We have, it's America _ Los Angeles. So let me go ahead and restart the server and try that again. And I'll just add that underscore there so it hopefully works this time. And I'll remove this. Okay, so I'll start up the server. And I'll go to posts to create it. We'll have Las Vegas. And we'll have America / Los _ Angeles. Okay, so execute that. And then I'll go to get cities, try it out, execute, and I get a result here. So for this one, it's still not updating well, and that's because I'm not returning the results, I'm returning DB. So just one last thing to get this one working. We'll go and we'll add the city again. So add Las Vegas, and then we'll get the results. And now we see the current time in Los Angeles down there. And of course, if I add Miami in there, it will do the same thing. And I could also do the same thing in the cities one if I wanted to. If I wanted to add the current time, I would just perform the request basically like this. So I can just copy this, but by first getting the city. So city equals, DB city ID -1. Perform the request, convert the time to JSON, and then basically return this. So I'll just take this dictionary, I'll copy it, return that, and then it's going to work for my endpoint where I get one particular city. So let me just go ahead and do that. And I'll create a city again, and then I'll go to the one for getting one individual city, city ID 1, because I only have one database or one item in the database. And I have Las Vegas, and then I have the time zone and the time again. So there is so much more that can be done, and especially with async stuff, I didn't use any async stuff in here. So when you're using anything that has like a wait in it, either within the function itself or somewhere down the line, like a function that you call within the function, you just have to specify this is async. But since I didn't do anything asynchronous in this example, I didn't have to put it. And if you put this here, nothing will happen if there's nothing async. But if there is something async, then you have to have this. Just keep that in mind. But there's so much more to cover for FastAPI. So if you like this framework and you think it's kind of an interesting approach, just let me know. I can definitely make more videos about it. So leave a comment down below. Tell me what you think about FastAPI and if you want me to make more videos about this. So that's it for this introduction. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.